When your own child looks you in the eyes and calls you a failure, the world doesn't shatter with a bang. It collapses in silence. That morning, I sat at my worn-out wooden table, the same one where I had once helped my daughter with her schoolwork, the same table where we celebrated her first job. The smell of cold coffee filled the air as she stood across from me, her voice sharp and polished with confidence that didn't belong to the little girl I raised. "Dad, you'll never be like Ethan's father," she said, arms crossed, chin lifted. "He's successful, respected, rich. You've worked your whole life and have nothing to show for it." I looked at her, this woman who once clung to my hand at the market, who cried when I fixed her broken toys, who believed I could do anything. Now, her words cut deeper than any wound life had given me. It wasn't the insult that hurt. It was the truth behind her eyes, that somewhere along the way she stopped being proud of me. I didn't respond. Not because I had no words, but because I knew none of them would matter. When love turns into comparison, silence becomes the only dignity you can afford. I just stared at her, memorizing her face, her confidence, her arrogance, every feature that reminded me she was my daughter, but no longer my little girl. She took my silence as surrender. "Dad," she sighed, "I'm not trying to hurt you. I just wish you'd made something of yourself." Then she walked away, heels clicking on the floor like a clock counting down to something I didn't yet understand. The door shut softly, but it sounded like an explosion inside my chest. For a long while, I didn't move. I watched the morning light stretch across the floor, touching everything except the space where she stood. My heart felt heavier than it had in years, not because she was wrong, but because maybe she was right. Maybe I had spent my life working, fixing, sacrificing, and somehow ended up with nothing worth showing. But as I stared at the fading light, another thought began to grow, a quiet, burning spark. What if she was right, but only for now? What if failure wasn't what she thought it was? What if success wasn't gold watches and grand houses, but something deeper, something she hadn't yet learned to see? That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through the small house I'd built with my hands, touching the old pictures on the walls. Her first bicycle, her graduation day, her wedding. Every photo whispered a reminder, you gave everything you had. And for the first time, I realized that was never failure. Still, her words stayed. They echoed in my head until they didn't hurt anymore. They motivated me. "You're a failure." No, I thought, I'm unfinished. I hadn't failed, I'd paused. Life had tested me, broken me, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to show her that what looks like failure can be the start of something extraordinary. So I made a silent promise. I wouldn't prove her wrong with anger or with pride. I would prove her wrong with action, with results she couldn't ignore. She wanted to compare me to her rich father-in-law? Fine. I'd let time do the comparing. Because one day she would realize the man she called a failure was the one who taught her what real success means. After that day, everything around me looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The house I built with my hands suddenly felt smaller. The walls echoed with her words, "You'll never be like him." I had heard insults before, from bosses, from creditors, from fate itself, but never from my own child. That sentence didn't just bruise my pride, it shattered years of sacrifice that she would never see. I spent that evening walking through the tiny workshop behind my house. The air smelled of oil and iron, the scent that had followed me for 30 years. These hands that she called useless had fixed engines, built toys, repaired bicycles, and once crafted a dollhouse for her when she was 7. She had smiled so wide back then. I remember thinking, if I can make her smile like that, I must be doing something right. But now, that same child believed money defined worth. I sat down on the old stool, the one with the broken leg I never bothered to fix, and looked at the faded photo hanging on the wall, her mother, and me, before life taught us how cruel time could be. My wife's illness had drained our savings, but I never told our daughter the truth. I worked extra shifts, borrowed from friends, sold my car, anything to keep her comfortable and in school. She thought her father didn't dream big enough. The truth was, I gave up my dreams so she could chase hers. As the night deepened, I realized I wasn't angry at her. I was angry at myself, for letting her believe that a man's value could be measured in dollars. Maybe I'd failed to teach her what real success meant. Maybe I'd been too quiet, too humble, too invisible. But that humility had a cost, and it was time to pay it. The next morning, I woke before sunrise and stepped outside. The street was still sleeping, the air cold and sharp. I looked at my old tools, rusted, heavy, loyal, and felt a strange fire burning inside me. She thought I had nothing left. But she didn't know I still had time. Time to rebuild, to rise, to remind her that some men don't need applause to be great. They just need a reason. I began remembering the moments that built me. The first day I started my workshop with $300 and a second-hand wrench. The nights I fell asleep on the floor beside unfinished projects. The times customers couldn't pay, but I helped them anyway. I wasn't rich, but I was proud of every drop of sweat that came from honest work. But now, pride wasn't enough. I wanted to grow. Not for revenge, not for ego, but for redemption. I wanted my daughter to look at me one day and realize that the man she called a failure was the one who never gave up, even when life broke him. So I went back to my desk and pulled out an old notebook. It had plans for a small engine design I once dreamed of creating. Something cleaner, cheaper, better for everyday people. I had shelved that dream years ago because there was no time. But now I had a new kind of time. The kind you create when your heart has been set on fire. That night, I wrote 3 words on the cover of that notebook. Begin again, Dad. I wasn't chasing wealth anymore. I was chasing purpose, and maybe, along the way, I'd remind my daughter what real success looks like. Some turning points don't come with loud thunder or applause. They arrive quietly, like a whisper in the heart. The morning after I reopened that old notebook, I felt something in me awaken. It wasn't anger anymore, it was focus. A man who has been called a failure no longer fears anything, because he's already lost everything that can hurt him. For the first time in years, I cleaned my workshop. I organized every tool, wiped every surface, and threw away the broken parts that reminded me of abandoned dreams. I told myself, if I'm going to rise, I'll rise from zero. As I worked, the memories came back. The sound of my daughter's laughter as a child, her voice saying, "You can fix anything, Daddy." That memory hit me hard. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten the man she once believed in. By afternoon, I went into town to find new parts for my old engine design. The shopkeeper, a young man who didn't know me, asked, "Starting something new, old man?" I smiled and said, "No, finishing something old." He didn't understand, but that was fine. Not everyone is meant to understand your journey when it starts in silence. The next few weeks were brutal. My hands shook, my eyes burned, and every joint screamed when I worked late into the night. I was no longer young, but I had something stronger than youth, purpose. I wasn't building an engine anymore. I was building my self-respect. I failed hundreds of times. Metal bent, wires snapped, motors sparked, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Each night, I sat alone in that small room, thinking of her words, "You'll never be like him." And every time I heard that voice in my mind, I pushed harder. What she didn't realize was that wealth can be inherited, but strength must be earned. I wanted to teach her that lesson through what I became, not what I said. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I would look at her old photographs, her graduation, her wedding, her smile, and wonder if she'd forgotten who made that smile possible. But then I'd shake my head and return to work. This wasn't about proving her wrong anymore. It was about finding me again, the version of me that used to believe in miracles made by hard work. Weeks turned into months. The first time that engine came to life, the sound wasn't loud, but to me, it was thunder. It sputtered, coughed, then roared into motion. My eyes filled with tears, not because of the smoke, but because, for the first time in years, I felt alive. I whispered to myself, "Failure, huh? Let's see what failure can do." I started small, showing the design to a local farmer, then a friend from the old factory. One helped me fix a flaw, another gave me contacts who were interested. Suddenly, what was once a forgotten dream started to look like a second chance. But I didn't tell my daughter. Not yet. Let the world tell her. Let the echo of my effort reach her ears before my words do. Because words fade, but results speak forever. That night, as I turned off the lights in my workshop, I caught my reflection in the window. I didn't see an old man anymore. I saw the boy who once believed that honest work could build miracles. And that boy had finally come home. Success doesn't always arrive with noise. It comes quietly, disguised as another long day. After months of sleepless nights, oil-stained hands, and endless rejections, something finally changed. One chilly morning, as the sun crept through the dusty window of my workshop, my machine came to life again. It wasn't perfect, but it worked better than ever before. The sound wasn't loud, but to me it was music, a heartbeat reminding me I was still alive, still capable, still becoming. That same week, fate sent me an unexpected visitor. Mr. Patel, an old friend and retired mechanic, showed up unannounced. He looked at the engine with disbelief, then at me. "You made this?" he asked. I nodded quietly. He bent down, tested it, listened to the hum. Then he smiled, the kind of smile you see once in a lifetime, and said, "You've done what big companies couldn't do, my friend. Don't stop." His words struck deep. For years, I had been starving for recognition, not fame or money, just someone to believe in me again. That day I got it. From there, small miracles began to happen. One farmer installed my design on his old tractor. The machine ran smoother and saved him fuel. Word spread fast. Another farmer came. Then another. Soon, I was driving from one village to another, repairing, teaching, installing, earning not much, but enough to rebuild what I'd lost: pride. People began calling me Master Michael, not out of formality, but respect. My daughter still didn't know. She believed I was just wasting time tinkering with useless metal. I let her believe it. I wanted the truth to find her on its own. Because the sweetest victories are the ones that speak for themselves. But success doesn't come without pain. There were nights I worked till my back gave out. My eyes burned from welding sparks. My hands bled from sharp edges. Once, the engine exploded mid-test, covering the wall in black smoke. I fell, coughing, heart pounding, but even then I laughed. Because that smoke wasn't failure, it was proof of progress. Every burn, every scar, every drop of sweat was writing my redemption story. Then, one afternoon, I received a phone call that would change everything. A small manufacturing company had heard about my invention through the farmers. They wanted to meet. I drove there in my old pickup, carrying the machine carefully in the back. I didn't wear a suit, just my cleanest shirt and hope. Inside the office, the owner, a woman named Clara, examined the engine. She tested it, disassembled a part, and said nothing for almost 10 minutes. My palms were sweating. Finally, she looked up and said, "You built this alone?" "Yes," I replied softly. She smiled. "You've created something valuable. I can't promise millions, but I can promise partnership. Together, we can make this reach people who need it." My throat tightened. Partnership. Recognition. Dignity. Words I hadn't heard in years. When I signed that paper, I felt like I was signing my name back into life. Weeks later, I stood in front of a small factory with my name painted on a metal board. Reeves Engineering, designed by Michael Reeves. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't millions, but it was mine. That evening, I sat outside the workshop as the sunset painted the sky gold. I held the first finished product in my hands and whispered, "You called me a failure, my girl. But failure is the reason I became this man." I didn't realize tears were rolling down my face, not from sadness, but pride. For the first time, I didn't feel small anymore. The world hadn't changed, but I had. And soon, so would everything else. Months passed, and success found its way to my doorstep. Not through fame, not through wealth, but through whispers. People began to talk. The same hands that were once called worn out were now building machines that made work easier for hundreds of families. My invention wasn't on TV or in magazines, but in villages, in garages, in people's lives. The world had started to see me again, but the person I wanted to see it most still hadn't. My daughter, Sarah, hadn't spoken to me properly in months. She still believed I was just an old man spending his last years in a dusty workshop. Every time she called, her words felt rehearsed, distant. She would mention Ethan, her husband, and how his father had bought another property, another car, another business. She never asked how I was. She never said she missed me. But I didn't blame her anymore. Because I knew what life would soon show her, not through my anger, but through my actions. Then came the day that changed everything. One Sunday afternoon, I received a call from her. Her tone was polite, not warm. "Dad," she said, "Ethan's parents are hosting a charity gala this weekend. It would be nice if you came." I paused. "You want me to come?" "Yes," she replied quickly. They'd like to meet you again." For a second I almost said no. I wasn't the same man anymore. I wasn't the broken father she once left standing in silence. I was someone who had rebuilt himself from ashes, but I didn't need to show it. I wanted the moment to happen naturally. I simply said, "All right, I'll be there." That Saturday night, I arrived at their mansion. The lights were bright, the music soft, and laughter filled the air. Everyone was dressed in expensive suits and shimmering gowns. I wore my best clothes, nothing fancy, but neat and proud. As I entered, a few heads turned. People whispered, not out of mockery, but curiosity. Sarah approached me with a faint smile, though I could see she was nervous. "Dad," she said, "you came?" "I said I would," I replied, keeping my tone calm. Ethan's father, Mr. Williams, soon joined us. He was a tall man, confident, with the kind of presence that fills a room. He extended his hand. "Ah, the famous Mr. Reeves," he said with a polite grin. I blinked. "Famous?" He chuckled. "You really don't know, do you? Your invention, the fuel-saving system, our company just purchased 2 of them for our farms. Brilliant work. My engineers wouldn't stop talking about it." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I turned toward my daughter. Her eyes widened, confusion turning into realization. "Wait, your company?" she asked her father-in-law. He nodded proudly. "That's Reeves Engineering. That's your father's company, isn't it? We had no idea he was your dad until last week." Silence spread between us. My daughter's lips trembled. "Dad, you never told me." I smiled softly. "You never asked." For the rest of the evening, people came up to shake my hand, to thank me for my work. One woman told me her husband's small business survived because of my design. Another man said, "You've done something no big name ever cared to do, made life easier for real people." I saw my daughter watching all this, speechless, frozen, her eyes filled with something between shame and pride. She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. Not as the poor man she pitied, but as the father she once admired. When the night was almost over, she walked toward me slowly. Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry." I looked at her gently. "Sorry for what?" "For not seeing you," she whispered. "For thinking success was only measured in money. You've done more than any of them." I placed my hand on her shoulder. "No, Sarah," I said quietly. "You weren't wrong to dream of comfort. You just forgot what built it. Success without gratitude is an empty home." She started to cry softly. The same tears I once shed alone were now in her eyes. I pulled her into a hug. "You called me a failure once," I said with a faint smile, "and maybe I was. But failure is what taught me how to rise." When I left that night, she walked me to the door. Her voice was trembling but full of respect. "Dad," she said, "I'm proud of you." And for the first time in years, I felt the weight lift from my chest. The world hadn't just seen my comeback. My daughter had finally seen me. That night after the gala, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the compliments or the applause, but because of the silence that followed them. The kind of silence that comes when a chapter finally ends. I sat by my window, staring at the half-built city skyline, and thought about how strange life is. How the same words that once broke you can later become your reason to rebuild. The next morning, there was a soft knock at my door. When I opened it, Sarah was standing there. No makeup, no pride, just my daughter, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded and stepped aside. She looked around the small house she once mocked for being too plain. Now her eyes softened at every corner, the photos on the wall, the old couch, the marks of a life built by love, not luxury. She placed the coffee cups on the table and sat down quietly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Dad, I don't even know where to start." I smiled gently. "Start where it hurts the most," I said. Her eyes glistened. "I was cruel to you. I compared you to Ethan's father because I thought money made a man worthy. I wanted comfort and I confused it with happiness. But when I saw how everyone respected you last night, it broke something in me. Because I realized, Dad, you never changed." "I did." I said nothing. Sometimes silence teaches more than words ever can. She continued, her voice shaking. "Ethan's father, the man I admired so much, treats people like property. He buys loyalty, he doesn't earn it. But you built everything with honesty, with struggle, with love. The people who respect you, they do it from their hearts. And she stopped to wipe her tears, I threw that away because I thought you were a failure." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. "Sarah," I said softly, "you weren't wrong to want a better life. But the mistake was thinking that money is the only way to measure success. It's not. True success is when you can look at yourself in the mirror and feel peace, not guilt." She covered her face with her hands. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You're my daughter. You don't earn forgiveness. You already have it." Tears fell down her cheeks. She whispered, "How do you stay so calm after everything I said?" I chuckled quietly. "Because pain doesn't destroy you, Sarah. It shapes you. Every insult, every loss, every tear, they teach you what really matters. You called me a failure, and maybe I needed to hear that. Because that day, you didn't just wake me up, you rebuilt me." She looked at me with a face I hadn't seen in years. The face of the little girl who used to believe her father could fix anything. Only this time, I hadn't fixed a toy. I had fixed something far greater. Her heart. We sat there for a long time, talking, really talking, for the first time in years. She asked about my invention, my new company, the people I worked with. For the first time, she listened. Every story made her eyes light up, not with envy, but pride. Before leaving, she stood at the door, hesitating. "Dad," she said, "can I visit your workshop sometime? I want to see where it all began." I smiled. "Of course, that's where your old dollhouse is still kept." She laughed through her tears. "You still have that?" "Of course," I said. "It reminds me of the first thing I ever built for you, and the last thing I ever built before losing myself." She nodded slowly. "Then maybe we can build something together again." After she left, I sat back down and closed my eyes. The house felt lighter. The air felt warmer. Not because success had arrived, but because peace finally had. That night, I realized something profound. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of it. It's the teacher that breaks your pride and rebuilds your soul. And sometimes, it takes losing your child's respect to finally earn it again. As I turned off the lights, I whispered to myself, "She saw me. That's all I ever wanted." And for the first time in a long, long while, I slept without regret. It's strange how the same house can feel entirely different when peace returns to it. Weeks had passed since that night, and Sarah now visited me often. Sometimes she brought dinner, sometimes she just sat in silence, watching me work. There was no judgment in her eyes anymore, only understanding. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she said, "Dad, you were right, success doesn't live in mansions or bank accounts. It lives here." She placed her hand over her heart, and I felt tears burn my eyes. I didn't need to hear anything else. I had spent a lifetime waiting for her to see me not as a man who failed, but as a man who tried. And now she did. I began reflecting on everything that had happened. How one cruel sentence, "You're a failure," had broken me, rebuilt me, and finally freed me. It taught me that sometimes, pain isn't your enemy, it's your guide. It shows you where you need to grow. My daughter's words weren't the end of my story. They were the beginning of my awakening. People in the neighborhood started visiting my workshop again. Not for business, but for advice, for inspiration. Some came with broken machines, others came with broken hearts. They'd say, "Michael, how did you do it? How did you turn failure into success?" And I'd smile and say, "By stopping the chase for approval and starting the journey toward purpose." One day, a young man walked in, desperate and lost. He'd lost his job and said, "I think I'm a failure." I saw myself in his eyes, the same hopelessness I once carried. I handed him one of my wrenches and said, "Then fix something. Anything. A failure is only a person who stopped trying." He smiled through his tears and started working beside me. That's when I realized, maybe my purpose wasn't to build engines anymore, it was to rebuild people. Sarah saw this too. She started helping at the workshop, learning how the machines worked, how the people who came in carried their pain. She said, "Dad, I want to help. Maybe we can open something bigger, teach people like you taught me." That was the moment I understood what legacy truly means. Not what you leave for people, but what you leave in them. Weeks later, I stood outside the workshop and looked at the new sign above the door. It didn't just say, "Reeves Engineering." Now, beneath it in smaller letters, it said, "A place where failure learns to rise." I smiled, because that's what my story had always been about. Not revenge, not competition, but resurrection. That evening, as I closed the shop, I recorded a message for those who might one day stumble upon my story. It went like this. If you're watching this, maybe someone has called you a failure too. Maybe you've been laughed at, ignored, or compared to people who seem bigger than you. I know that pain. But listen carefully, failure isn't the opposite of success, it's the fuel that drives it. Every scar, every rejection, every broken moment is shaping you into something unstoppable. You just have to keep moving. People will judge your journey without ever knowing your battles. But one day, the same people who doubted you will whisper your name with respect. That day isn't magic, it's the result of every night you refuse to quit. I paused before finishing the recording, letting my voice soften. So if no one believes in you right now, believe in yourself. That's all it takes. You're not done. You're just unfinished. Then I smiled into the camera, the same way I smiled that day my daughter called me a failure, and ended the video with these words. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you of your own strength. Like this video if you've ever been called a failure but refused to give up. Comment below what keeps you going, because your story might inspire someone else. And don't forget to subscribe, not just for more stories, but for reminders that you are never alone in your fight. The screen faded to black with one last line on it. You're not a failure. You're a work in progress. And that was the real success I'd been chasing all along.